Hello, this is Grant Irons from AWS Educate. Thanks for joining the Supporting the Rapid Transition to Remote Learning webinar series from Amazon Web Services. Educators all over the world are rapidly transitioning to remote learning, some for the very first time, and we wanted to do something to ease the transition. This webinar series was created for educators by educators who have expertise in remote learning and can share their insights with you. The series runs through May 1st, so check back on the website each Monday to view new webinar topics. You'll be muted during this webinar, but we want to hear from you, so please put your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer throughout the presentation and also have time set aside at the end to answer your questions. Note that this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to both the recording and the certificate of attendance following the webinar. Now, I'd like to introduce Dave Braunschweig from Harper College to discuss how to create engaging online labs and activities.
Hello and welcome to this presentation on how to create engaging online labs and activities. Today we want to talk about the Absorb, Do, Connect model, the process-oriented guided inquiry learning model, and then using OpenEducational Practices to engage our students. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end. My name is Dave Braunschweig. I'm a professor of computer information systems at Harper College in Palatine, Illinois, United States. I have 23 years of remote learning experience, and I have a Master Online Teacher Certificate. If you'd like to keep in touch, you can reach me on LinkedIn at Dave Braunschweig. Let's start with an overview of engaging online learning. Student engagement. We know students are engaged when they are involved in their work, when they persist despite challenges and obstacles, and they take visible delight in accomplishing their work. When we're working with students in the classroom, we can see that visible delight in their accomplishments. When we're working with them online, we see it more in their writing, sometimes in their discussion board posts, but you'll know when your students are engaged. Active learning strives to involve students in the learning process. And now a couple of pedagogy terms that I want to include here. Constructivism and contextual learning theory. The idea here is that learning takes place when students can construct meaning based on their own experiences. We have to be able to put something in context in order for the learning to mean something to us. Think about any class that you've been in or taught, and a student says, "When am I ever going to use this?" When a student says that, there really isn't any learning taking place because they don't have context in which to place the learning. We have to provide a way for students to be able to apply their learning in order for it to be meaningful. So let's practice this ourselves. Think of a class you teach or a class you recently completed as a student. How active is the learning process for that class? How do learners in that class connect with and build on what they already know? And I'm going to give you a moment here to think about this. What class are you wanting to focus on for this presentation? How active is that learning? And how do learners in that class make connections to what they already know? Some takeaways. Student engagement depends on active learning, and learning depends on students being able to connect with and construct meaning from their own experiences. We now want to consider two different ways that you can design activities that allow students to engage with and connect with their learning. The first is Absorb, Do, Connect. Absorb, Do, Connect is a three-step framework proposed by William Horton in his book E-Learning by Design in 2006. Absorb activities inform and inspire. They provide the background information for the learning to take place. Do activities transform information into knowledge and skills. Information by itself isn't enough. We want to take that information and engage with it. We want to do something with the learning. And finally, we need to connect. We have to have a connection between what we've just learned and how we can apply that learning in our own environments. So what are absorb activities? We know that they inform and inspire, but examples are readings, presentations, demonstrations, stories. If you can get someone to come in and tell stories, that's wonderful, and videos. As we move to online learning, videos are a very common way for us to inform and inspire our students. Now the do part. What can we do with that information? We have just read something, we have just watched something. How do we respond to that? Options are class discussion, and in an online environment, we're going to have a discussion board. We can combine think, pair, share exercises where you have 2 or 3 students together collaborate on what this means to them. We can do hands-on activities. We can perform lab exercises. We can have formative assessments. And there was a separate presentation on assessments that you can go back and view for more information. We can find games, online websites with gaming activities. We can have the students perform guided analysis. We can present case studies for them to analyze. And we can create collaborative learning projects for them to engage in. Somewhere at the end of the do activities, you want to include opportunities for the students to connect. We want them to build an association between the knowledge and skills and their own real-world experiences. It can either be something that they have done in the past, something they've already learned, or something that they expect to do in the near future. At work, we do this, and this is something I just learned so that now I can apply it to this thing that happens at work on a regular basis. That's the kind of idea we're looking for. So applied research and analysis, personal evaluation through reflective writing, group critiques, something that's providing that personal perspective to the activities. Here's an example that I use when I'm creating an Absorb, Do, Connect activity. I start with readings. I give them links to whatever information background is going to help them understand the new concepts. And I also include a section for multimedia. I found about 6 years ago that student learning desires really changed. Before 6, 7 years ago, students would read. Now they would much rather watch a video than they would read a chapter in a book. So I try to include both. I have readings for background information and multimedia that covers the same concepts. It's up to the students to choose which readings and which multimedia work for them. Once we have those, I look at the do part. What activities can I have students perform that will engage them in this new information and allow them to experience and engage in the learning? Once I've got the activities listed, then there will be some sort of a learning summary, a what were you supposed to get out of this, an opportunity to reflect back and say, this is what was helpful to me, this is what I got out of it. And at the bottom, I have a link here for you to Wikiversity Contextual Learning if you want to see more of this full activity. Some best practices. Provide a variety of absorb activities to support multiple learning styles. Give them choices of reading, give them choices of multimedia. You can even have the students select their own. Encourage them to do research and find additional readings or additional videos that support the same learning ideas. Then provide a variety of do activities to support different levels of prior experience and engagement. The choice here is really important. I will typically expect students to do 2 or 3 activities in a given lesson, but I will usually try to list 6, 7, 8 different activities for them to choose from. Several things happen when you list a variety of choices. Number one, you're targeting different levels of experience. So someone brand new is going to want to pick the first or second activity. They think it's easy. They're going to go with that. Students with more experience might want more of a challenge. So they're going to look for a harder activity, something that they find challenging or more relevant to their personal experience. But the other thing that happens when you give students choice is they'll read the whole list, trying to find the one that is easiest for them. And this provides a bigger learning experience because you've encouraged them to cover the whole range of concepts without having them complete each of the 6, 7, or 8 activities. So there's more learning up front just by giving the choices. The other thing that happens when students choose the activity that they're going to complete, it really reduces the complaints. It's very hard for a student to complain about an activity that they selected. I didn't like number 1. Okay, fine. Don't do number 1. You can do number 2 instead. Oh, okay. So I really encourage you to have a wide range of choices so that they are selecting their own engagement. Finally, require students to engage in one or more Connect activities to solidify the associations between their new knowledge and skills and their own experiences. They have to make that connection for it to be meaningful. So let's practice ourselves. Think of that class that you teach or one you recently completed as a student. Does that class have a range of absorb activities? If you have readings, do you have multimedia? Do you need to add it? Do you have a wide variety of do activities students may complete that achieve the same learning outcomes? And are there ways for students to connect that learning with their world? What changes, if any, would you like to make? And we're going to pause just for a moment and give you an opportunity to make notes. Are there changes you want to make in that class you're thinking about? Some takeaways. Absorb activities inform and inspire. Do activities transform information into knowledge and skills. And Connect activities prepare students to apply that learning. Absorb, do, and Connect activities are a very easy way to create engaging online learning experiences. For a more advanced approach, there is the process-oriented guided inquiry learning, or what we'll just call POGIL from now on. POGIL is a 9-step process-oriented guided learning inquiry, student-centered group learning instructional strategy. This is more advanced than just the Absorb, Do, Connect. It was developed in 1994 as an approach to teach general chemistry, and POGIL activities follow the same idea of exploration, concept invention, and application, but with what I would describe as much more detail, much better documentation for them to experience that learning. There are a wide variety of POGILs already written, and you can access that information at pogil.org. The idea behind a POGIL, or the POGIL elements, are a title introducing the activity, a 3-sentence overview that gives it context and perspective, any prerequisites that are necessary for the learning experience, the learning objectives or the learning outcomes that you want to achieve in this activity, and then a model or example. What information do you want to provide that gives background that students can follow so that they can do this activity on their own? And then we give them guided inquiry questions, a step-by-step process of questions that they want to answer in order to acquire this learning. The questions are followed by 2 parts, exercises and problems. And the difference between the two, exercises are questions or activities that they can complete just based on the information provided. They don't need to go beyond. Just what is included in the activity is enough for them to complete the exercises. Problems go beyond the exercises. They have to go outside the learning that they've just experienced and apply it in some shape or form. They have to synthesize, they have to create. They're going to go beyond just the base information. And then at the end, there's a conclusion and again, an opportunity for self-assessment. So if you look at this, we have the same idea of an Absorb, Do, Connect, but it's much more detailed in terms of the information that we're going to provide to students, and perhaps in the level of detail that we expect them to respond. And to give you an example of how to do a POGIL, I actually thought of and created a POGIL on how to create a POGIL. And if you would like to see more of this, it's on Wikiversity under POGIL and then how to create a POGIL. But it follows the steps that we just outlined. There is an objective, there are prerequisites, there's an introduction, there is exploration, there are exercises, there are problems, and there's a summary at the end. And if you follow this POGIL, it is an exercise in how to create a POGIL for your class. So you can try it and go step by step, and it will lead you through the questions you need to answer to create your own POGIL. And again, that's on Wikiversity, POGIL, and then how to create a POGIL. So let's practice this. Think of a class you teach or a class you recently completed as a student. Which of those activities in that course could be completed as self-guided exploration? And as we move to online learning, that's what we're really doing, is helping our students in their own self-guided exploration. And if they're going to lead themselves through this learning experience, what instructions do we need to provide for students to explore on their own? So some takeaways. POGIL is a student-centered, self-guided exploration learning strategy. POGILs are already available for a wide range of disciplines, and there are templates available for you to create your own POGIL. Now that we have two different templates that we can use for online learning experiences, let's look at another way that you can do engaging online learning activities, and that is through OpenEducational Practices. OpenEducational Practices use open educational resources to innovate the learning process. If you aren't familiar with open educational resources, these are copyrighted materials that have a different license. Typically, materials that are written have a copyright, and very often that copyright will be all rights reserved at the end. Open educational resources, instead of being all rights reserved, are usually tagged with a "you may reuse this material if," and the if is if you credit the source, if you copy it exactly, if you don't make any changes to it. There are a range of choices for what the if includes. Most often, it is just referencing the source. As long as you say where it came from, you're free to use the materials. And there will be a license on the materials letting you know that it is an open resource. OER is free to use, it is free to reuse, it is free to revise, it is free to remix, and free to redistribute. The important part of this is using OER allows us to change our disposable assignments into activities which add value to the world. We can take content and build on it. And if you want to learn more about the idea behind disposable assignments versus reusable and renewable assignments, David Wiley has a really good blog article on this, and the link is provided here. There is also, if you are interested, on Wikiversity, a full 8-week graduate level course on open educational practices. Some examples to give you ideas of how open educational practices might work in your environment. Wikipedia has a Wikipedia education program, and the tagline for that program is the end of throwaway assignments and the beginning of real-world impact for student editors. You already know that Wikipedia is the first place your students are looking for background information. It's just what they're going to do. So we have an opportunity to improve that background knowledge. You can pick a Wikipedia article and have your students work to improve it. If you're going to do this, I want to encourage you to contact Wikipedia through the education program and work out where they want that editing to take place. There is draft space on Wikipedia, and they may prefer that your students work on a draft page rather than the actual live page. And if you work with Wikipedia, they'll help you set that up. You can also edit Wikibooks. An instructor at my college who teaches computer information systems had her honor students write an entire Wikibook for that course. And over 2 semesters, they were able to replace the textbook for that course. Other options are available at Wikiversity. One course that uses Wikiversity is Applied Programming. And that is a course where my students, I gave them examples and a template, and they went through and created all of the learning content for that course. So after they wrote the programming, whatever the programming assignment was, they went back and made notes of, these are things that I wish I had known up front in order to complete this activity. It turns out that if you do a Google search for applied programming, that course is now the #1 link that comes up for applied programming, and my students created it. A similar project is digital media concepts. There's an instructor in California who teaches digital media, and instead of having students create a paper that gets turned in and thrown away, her students create a page on some digital media concept that is posted on Wikiversity. The content is public for everyone to see and build on, and people do come back after the semester's over and read those articles and sometimes edit them, improve them, update them. One of my favorite projects on Wikiversity is the Federal Writers Project Life Histories. This is created by an English set of English courses in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And their English 105 course, which is a writing composition course, rather than having the students create term papers that get thrown away at the end of the semester, their term papers are written on Wikiversity, complete with references, complete with all of the typical activities you would see in a writing project. But what makes these really interesting is that they go beyond just the writing, and then at the end, they will include a reflection of how the person whose life they are summarizing relates to our current environment. So they might be writing about someone's life in the 1800s, but then they reflect on that experience was similar to our own because. A couple of other projects. There is Helping Give Away Psychological Science. And this project is created by multiple colleges and universities. And they have a list now of at least 30, maybe 40 different psychological assessment guides that have been put together by students to help everyone study and then analyze psychological sciences. So the guides are already out there, and then future sections can build on that learning. Finally, motivation and emotion. There is a professor in Australia who has his students every semester write the book on motivation and emotion. For 10 years now, there is a new book He gives them chapter or section titles, and it's kind of in between writing a book chapter and the idea of the Federal Writers Project. They are doing a complete, what would end up being a 5 or 10 page term paper like experience. But motivation and emotion, they will often record a video up front that introduces the topic. They will present their chapter, and they are the expert on that topic for the semester. So other students come to them to learn and read and understand that concept of motivation and emotion. And I encourage you to check out any of these projects and others that are available under Open Educational Practices. So let's try this ourselves. Think of that class you teach or recently completed as a student. What proprietary learning resources, books or etc., are you currently using that could be replaced with free open educational resources? If you use free resources, your students can have that link at home. They can open it, they can access it, they can print it if they like. They don't have to purchase anything. And if you have free resources that you can build on, what course activities could be completed as reusable assignments that would add value to the world? What could you have your students do that would be engaging and creating public content that all of the rest of us could learn from? So takeaways. Open educational practices innovate the learning experience, the learning process, and open educational practices change disposable assignments into free activities which add value for everyone. Now we have time for questions. Who has questions?
Thanks for sharing your expertise with us, Dave. And thank you everyone for your active participation through the questions pane. We really appreciate all of the questions and comments so far. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be hosting more webinars on remote learning, and we're also hosting office hours to answer any further questions you might have. You can find information for both the webinar series and office hours on our webpage found on the screen and in chat. A link to the recording of this webinar and a certificate of completion will be sent to you via email within the next few hours. Last, you'll see a survey pop up when you close the webinar. Please provide your feedback on the survey so we can continue to improve these webinars. We will continue to answer questions through the top of the hour.
Dave, that was really good stuff. Thank you so much for sharing. And like we said earlier, thank you for asking questions and providing comments in the questions pane. So for the next couple of minutes, we are going to go ahead and answer questions through the questions pane, but we'll also answer questions live. So Dave, are you there?
I am. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Again, really good questions. Before I ask you questions, are there any comments or questions in the questions pane that you want to address live?
I was answering a number of them as we went along, and unfortunately I hid all the answered questions, so I can't go back and cheat on those. But I really want to encourage everyone to check out the links that have been provided. The intent is for this to be an engaging presentation on creating engaging online learning. So I hope you all do follow up, click on the links, and look at how you could apply this learning to your environment.
And Dave, you gave us some really good concepts with regards to Absorb, Do, Connect, POGIL, and Open Educational Practices. Is there a situation where one works better than the other? Maybe a topic or a presentation format? When should educators use one versus the other?
I think it depends on time for the educator more than anything else. Absorb, Do, Connect is really easy, and I would think is the minimum that you can do to create an engaging resource. You have to provide background information. You have to provide something that they can do to engage with that information. And for them to have actually learned from the experience, they have to make that connection to what they already know or what they already do. So I think that's the minimum you need to do. When you want to more fully prepare them, Absorb, Do, Connect, if I do it in the classroom, I find that I have to still provide explanations, answer a lot of questions. When I do it in the POGIL format instead, it really is a hands-off. The instructor is there mostly to walk around and answer questions individually. There's much less having to answer everyone up front because all of the information they need is there. And as we're switching to online learning, this becomes more important. So I think the POGIL is better for online learning, but it requires a much heavier investment. I can do Absorb, Do, Connect and be done in, maybe an hour or two. When I do a POGIL, it really takes a while to make sure I have everything fully documented. For open educational practices, that really is, I hate to say it, jumping off of the deep end, but it is more of a jumping off the deep end of, wow, I have the freedom to let my students create content and trusting that they will do it well, and then I come back and edit it afterwards. So it's much more of a being willing to let your students really construct their own learning and their own meaning, and then adapting to that based on where their interests lead them. So it's a little more of an advanced concept.
So what do you do whenever you have students that aren't diving in and aren't interested in advancing their own learning?
It's tricky. I am fortunate that I teach at the college level, so if students don't engage, then they don't get rewarded. I don't have to give out good grades. I do everything I can to motivate the student. We try to work with their advisor. I try to work with them. But in the end, I don't teach required courses. Anyone who's taking my course wanted to take a computer course, so I don't have to deal with that as much as others might.
Good point. Someone asked a question, Lisa asked a question, how do you combat issues with students sharing completed assignments to websites that others can view? Is this considered cheating?
It certainly would be considered cheating if they don't, or at least plagiarism, if they don't provide a link to it. The trick in dealing with that is to have an assignment that the internet doesn't know the answer to. When I have students do online activities, what I require from them isn't the activity, but a summary of their learning from that activity. And I did this early on when I had 20 students all doing the same thing. And I didn't want to read 20 versions of the same thing. So I asked them to give me instead a summary of their learning. And the way I describe it is, tell me what you did, tell me what you learned, and tell me how you're going to apply that learning. And I usually describe it as, if you had to explain to your mother or your significant other what it was you learned in this class, how would you describe that? And so what I end up getting instead is usually a 300 to 500 word explanation of what they learned and how they can apply it. We all know if we learn something, there's going to be a story behind it. It took me a while to do this. I didn't get this the first time and I had to come back to it. There's a story that goes with learning. And what I ask them is to tell me that story. So when I'm reading these summaries, there's no way they're going to find that on the internet. The internet just doesn't tell those stories. So that helps to make the learning experience unique, even though everyone's accessing the same materials.
That makes sense. Really interesting question from Karen. She says, do you have any best practices or resources that teach students how to work in a remote online environment? That's the first part. But then I want to ask you to dive a little deeper on the second part. How do you actually, and then how to actually learn? I ask because so many students are used to being told what they need to learn and know instead of being empowered to learn on their own. So this is, for students, a shift from being told to actually having to learn. Any best practices you can share on helping the students make that shift?
There are, and this is something that I deal with all the time because my students come into my classes with the same problem, in that they expect, many of them, they expect to be told, okay, do this, do this, do this, learn this. And my courses, I'm teaching programming. It's much more of a critical thinking, problem-solving approach. And so my answer to you, are there resources to help students learn how to learn online? There are. I'm actually working with a colleague at my college right now in writing one. There's going to be on Wikiversity a student success course, and it's going to be a first-year student seminar that will teach it, specifically targeting online learning. We've got about half of it done now, and I can give you a link. It's draft stage only, but I can give you a link to that. But the other thing I would promote is scaffolding. You really need to start from the beginning and lead them through this learning experience. And so, start easy. Provide a lot of detail up front that says, go look at this, go look at this. Now tell me how you would do this. And as you get further and further into your course, you'll find that you don't need as much of that scaffolding. They will have learned it as they went along. So be prepared up front. The first 4 weeks are painful as you lead them, guide them, drag them through the experience. But after you get about 3-4 weeks into it, they will grasp it. They will pick up on this is a new learning skill. Reward them, assess constantly. I have assessments throughout the week. I'm in contact with students who are participating. I'm in contact with at least 3 or 4 times a week, mostly online through the learning environment, not through email. But I'm grading assignments, or I'm responding to discussion posts, or I know they're engaged with others. And so it builds that learning community, and they all learn from each other. And that helps to get them into the process because they learn from each other what's working.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the comments you made earlier was in, I forget if it was Absorb, Do, Connect, I believe, or POGIL, but you walk around and you help students in the traditional classroom by just looking over their shoulder and answering questions. How do you do that in a virtual classroom? Number one, please answer. And then number two, for everyone who's listening, I want to refer back to Dave's webinar called Best Practices for Online Training and Assessment. So he'll dive deeper in that previous webinar, but Dave, can you kind of give an idea of how you walk around virtually?
The walk around virtually needs to be, and I think in that other presentation I talk about being the guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. It is configuring a learning environment where you know at any given point where your students are. So I have them do, there are first drafts due every Monday. They can submit as many drafts as they need to. There's a final draft due on Thursday, so that we're getting things done during the week instead of over the weekend. I found that that helps. And so as I'm seeing the drafts come in, I know where each individual student is. I know where the class overall is. It allows me to provide announcements, discussion board posts, whatever I need to do to say, okay, you know what, half of you missed this key link that I posted last Thursday. Here's the link again. Please go back and read this before you submit assignment 14. That kind of an idea. Giving them a chance. Nobody gets to move on in my course unless they have successfully completed the previous activity. So it might be, I had somebody this week who did 5 attempts before they finished assignment 14. That's what it took. That's what I graded, and we kept going. There is a late penalty, but it's not a horrible late penalty. It's enough that, okay, I need to try and get back caught up. But they had to learn it to move on. And so that's, I think, the way you walk around in an online environment, is that you fully support your students, but you require success.
I love it. Another question, is Absorb, Do, Connect just a variation of Think, Pair, Share?
No, I would say Think, Pair, Share is one of the activities you could do in an Absorb, Do, Connect, and it could have the Connect aspects to it. Absorb, Do, Connect should go beyond that. Yeah, I could see how you would say the think part, whatever you handed out for the think part is the absorb, and then you're doing and doing a connection. So it would be one example of Absorb, Do, Connect, but I think you can go much further with that. You can do all kinds of other absorb, provide videos, provide speakers, things like that. And the connects could go further. There are a lot more things you could do other than just with 1 or 2 other people. You could do wikis, you could do team projects, anything like that. So think of it as the Think, Pair, Share, but then go much further as far as your imagination leads you.
Great, thank you. Earlier you mentioned when you were talking about open educational practices, you mentioned a class that you're teaching or you've taught before. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, the link that we put out there for Wikiversity Open Educational Practices is a course that I have taught twice now. It is free and open. We did it last summer and we had 81 people from 50 different institutions participate in that course. And it's a really good experience. It's front loaded so that we all know with MOOCs, there tends to be a big reduction in attendance as you go forward. So it's front loaded with the most important information you need for understanding open educational resources, understanding open educational practices, and then how to actually implement that in your courses. So it takes you through the wiki approach. It takes you through creating a press book. It takes you through creating your own YouTube videos. And then we come back and look at, all right, if I was going to do this in one of my courses, how would I apply that information? So it's a really good experience, and I think we will do it again this June. I haven't announced it officially, but pretty good chance that we'll do it in June and July as an 8-week open experience, free and open to anyone.
Wow, that sounds awesome. And so everyone, the link is in chat and it's also on the screen from earlier if you're watching the recording. How do you teach laboratory courses in an online environment? Do you have any experience doing this, since I know that you're mainly computer science? What about lab courses?
I'm fortunate that my lab is a computer lab, so we can do things like AWS, and AWS Educate has wonderful resources that we can take advantage of that our students don't have to pay for. They can get credits and use computers that way. Other lab classes, I can only tell you what my colleagues are doing right now to teach their lab classes online. What I hear they are doing is they went into the lab themselves and they recorded themselves completing the lab activity, and then they give the data to the students that was generated from the instructor doing the lab activity, and they ask the students then to do the exact same activity they would have done at home after class that they would have done if they'd been in the lab. The only difference is that they're watching the instructor complete the physical lab versus having the students do it. But the learning experience, other than hands-on touching the chemicals, the learning experience is the same.
Wow, that's a great idea. Another question that came in, do you typically use videos that are already online, or do you create your own videos whenever you're working with students?
This is unfortunately one of my weakest points. I don't like my own voice. I don't like seeing myself on the screen. So whenever I can get away with it, I will try to find a YouTube video, or I ask my students to find YouTube videos. And one of their requirements is they need to find a resource to recommend to their classmates each week. A recommendation is one of their post requirements. So they will go out and find videos they like, and I will often check those videos. And if I think they're better than anything we already have in the course, I'll put that in the course instead. I have one course I've done where I had the students actually record videos. It was their final project, and they had to record a video, and any of the good ones were then put into the course for future semesters. However, with this new change to online learning, I am trying to get better about doing my own recording. I've now got my own recording lights set up, and I got a green screen that came in this week. So I'm going to try to start doing my own, a little bit more of my own videos.
Love the idea of having students go find videos and also record their own. That goes along with the open educational practices concept you were talking about earlier. It's fantastic. And I look forward to seeing your videos with the green screen and what you have on the back.
Yeah, one of our other instructors did one where he was presenting a concept, and the green screen allowed him to float on top of his presentation rather than being in a box beside the presentation. And I really like that approach, and I'm going to try and make it work, but I'm not there yet.
That sounds awesome. Question about POGILs. This was from Lisa. How long does it typically take for you to create a POGIL?
The first ones were pretty painful because what you find, and I think this is true of creating any content, but online in particular, is that you need a template. So the first one is difficult because you have to take somebody else's idea and make it work for you. Once you get the first one and you like it, and then you do the second one, then you do the third one, and then after that, it's not so bad. I would say a POGIL now takes me 1 to 2 hours. Once I get going on a lesson, if I'm going to have multiple POGILs in it, those go faster. But the first one, when I come to it, it's always okay, what do I really need to do here? What do I need to do next? And so I would recommend plan 1 to 2 hours to create a POGIL.
Great. Once you have the experience, it becomes easier.
It gets much easier the 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th, 27th. Okay, I do have one here I want to address. Where could I find quality online labs or activities for my classes that are free? And this really gets into the open educational resources concept. Several places you can go for that. One of the best is probably going to be Merlot, M-E-R-L-O-T, merlot.org. That tends to be the most designed as one-off hands-on activities. There are a lot of other places you can look too. If you're looking particularly for computer resources, Wikiversity has a lot of those. And then if you want to find open educational resources in general, I would recommend a thing called MOM, the Mason Open Meta Finder. George Mason University has it. And if you do a search for like MOM OER, you should be able to find that search tool. And it searches at least 18 and maybe up to 30 different OER repositories. So that's probably the best search tool for finding these free resources. The other thing you can do is think about, it is surprising, but I find that students learn more the less instruction I give them. And it just sounds backwards, but if you structure it and scaffold it carefully, you can create an environment where they do some of the hands-on learning themselves. You can give everybody an activity of, all right, I want everyone to go find the best resource they can on X, and let them help you create the content for future semesters. It sounds crazy, but I have done it now. I have started courses with a template, but no content, and had the students fill in the content as we went. And the first semester, the learning goes great, even though the content's only about half built when we're done. By the end of the second semester, we have the full course built, and the students wrote most of
it. That would make me a little nervous to start a course without content, but that's exciting.
It does, and that's where I'm going into the deep end. What I do is I start with the assessments. As long as I have the assessments, in other words, I'll have the quizzes built, or I'll pick quizzes, or I'll have all of the programming assignments written. So I know what the assessments are. I know we can get to the end. It's just a question of what information sources do we need along the way. And as long as I'm comfortable that I can say, okay, if you start with this and my explanation, we can get you through this assessment, that works. So it's not starting with nothing. You have a full plan for your course, but what you don't have is the absorb part of it. You ask the students through doing to provide the absorb. And it's a fascinating approach to learning. It's much more effective, but boy, you need your seatbelt on when you do it.
Most definitely.
Just kind of looking through other questions.
Yeah, and it's fun to see the questions or the comments coming in, and people are really thinking differently about the way they teach their courses and the way they set their courses up. So thank you very much, everyone, for your comments and questions. We have a couple of more minutes. Actually, while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I have one that I saw earlier. Can you share about how you integrate the open education practices into your courses? I think you've kind of mentioned it a little bit, but could you talk specifically about how you do that?
I can, and I want to describe the motivation behind it first. And this was 6, 7, 8 years ago, but it was that idea of I can continue to teach my 20 or 25 students, and that works fine. but I'm only ever going to change those 20 or 25 students. If I switch my content and put it online for everyone, then I have an opportunity to reach not only my students, but other instructors and other students anywhere who don't have access to these resources in their world for whatever reason. So it was a, how do I engage the rest of the world? And I just did it as a trial. And it turned out that my success rates went up about 20% by switching to these free online resources. And there's a lot of studies about why the success rates go up and how much they go up. The content's more engaging, everyone has access to it, but it just turned out that it worked. So I did it for another course, and then I did it for another course. And it turned out that it was working so well that, okay, I need to do, I had a list of 10 courses I wanted to do, and I couldn't do them fast enough. And so I said to myself, who can do this with me? Oh, I have students. I have an audience that I can require assignments of. Let's figure out what they can do to provide some of this content. And so the ideas have just built around that, and it depends on what you're teaching as to how far into this you can go. A lot of your intro first course in, like a 101 course, a lot of your 101 courses, the content's all out there. You can ask your students to help you find it. Some of the more advanced courses, surprisingly, also go the same way because you're now working with advanced students. So again, probably the best example of that is the one we linked to on applied programming. And if you search Google for applied programming, it actually comes up. The Wikiversity link is the first link that comes up. And it is just so cool to me that my students created that content. I gave them the template, but they wrote almost all of the content for that course. So the more I have gotten into it myself, the more I have seen it succeed. And the more it succeeds, the more I want to do more of it until, you don't know, you're not trying hard enough if you're not failing. So I try to go right out to that edge of, okay, that was too far, I need to dial it back.
Very much the guide on the side versus the sage on the stage.
And I'm fortunate, I have to give credit to my institution that they let us try this. I will not tell you that it is not without complaints. I do have some students that are, why am I paying for a course when all of the materials are free and I could do this on my own? I had a student this semester, why should I be doing this? I'm not going to write your textbook for you. So there are some complaints, but my institution has been fully supportive, completely engaged through OpenEducational Practices. Over the last 3 years, my institution has saved students $1 million in textbook costs.
Wow.
And it's increased our enrollment by a figure, I don't want to quote it right now, but not only, when you save students money on textbooks, they have money left over for more classes. So it's actually a benefit to everyone to use open resources when you can.
That's great. That's great. And as you were talking about students contributing to courses, I was flashing back to grad school when I wrote chapters for my advisor's book that she then published. And
the nice thing about open, when you do it with open, the students get the credit. If anyone clicks on any of the courses I've created, you can see the names of the students and what they contributed to that content.
That's awesome. There actually was a question about open source and licensing. So is there are there wiki books that are open source, or are the wikis open source? And you mentioned licensing earlier, but could you answer that one more time about how licensing works?
Real simple behind open educational resources. All content, at least in the United States, is assumed to be copyrighted unless someone says otherwise. The difference with open content is that it is right after copyright, typically it will say all rights reserved. And when you have open content, instead of it saying all rights reserved, it will say, typically it's a Creative Commons license. And so it will say CC BY. And when it says CC BY, it's no longer all rights reserved. It is instead anybody can use this in any way they want as long as they provide attribution to the original source. There's some other minor, small, how are you supposed to reference it, those kinds of things that are best practices. But the real idea behind it is as long as you credit the source, you can use that content however you wish. Now, wikibooks. All wikibooks are CC BY SA, meaning that As long as you credit the source and any derivatives you release are with the same license, then you can use that content however you wish. So yes, all wikibooks are open. All Wikipedia content is open. All Wikiversity content is open. If you go to Open Textbook Library, all of the Open Textbook Library books, and there are thousands now, that is all open content. You can take it, edit it, redistribute it, as long as you credit the original source.
That is such a change, but exciting to hear. So we are actually at the end of time. And Dave, I want to say thank you again. I always love talking to you and listening to you and learning from you because you have really, really good, interesting ideas and concepts and ways of teaching. Thank you for all the participants for your questions and your comments. It's been a really engaging conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
And one more reminder, you can go to the website and sign up for future webinars. We have a few more, and all past webinars are archived there, and they are available on YouTube in over 100 languages. Thank you, everyone.